Hello, this is Mike Heimberger. I am here tonight to just do a little video for you, a little show and tell, I suppose. I've been recording and composing my own music for a long time, and but really about the last few months I've been getting much more serious about it and wanting to do it more than just like a occasional hobby, wanting to really get back into media composing, film scoring, things like that. What I'd like to do is give you kind of a little tour of my setup, my equipment, which is woefully underpowered for what I am trying to achieve, but I'm still able to get professional sounding results. Now, I am not a professional, and so definitely anything that I tell you in this video, do not take it as advice from a professional of things that you must do. This is simply things that I have learned over the past few months that I believe would be helpful to anyone else who is like me wanting to get into this more seriously. For me, the equipment that I had and the computer, the sounds that I had, they were a mental hurdle to get over to jump back into this. It seems like a technical hurdle, but really it's a mental hurdle. And I'll try to show you why. So first off, my computer, I am using a MacBook Pro. And as you can see on the screen here, it is a mid-2009 MacBook Pro. It's more than a decade old. It's been through a lot, and it's been through a few upgrades. It's been reset 3 or 4 times, like reinstalled the OS fresh. The only other thing that's been done to it is the hard drive. The original hard drive was replaced a few years ago with a solid-state drive. And that was a huge improvement. So definitely recommend solid state drive. If you don't already have one, it's much, much better. So take a look here on the screen. I've got it's El Capitan version 10.11.6, which a lot of current sample library software is not going to run on this. The current version of Contact will not run on this. So there are various sample libraries that run in Contact that I cannot play. So storage, I've got a 500 gigabyte solid state drive. Memory, whopping 4 gigabytes. So yeah, professional recording setups you hear, they've got 16 at minimum. 4 gigabytes is nothing. And so once you load a few nice quality sample libraries, that memory gets eaten up pretty fast. And you add another instrument and Logic crashes. But given that, if you've only got 4 gigabytes, you can still do this. So I'm going to show you how you can make all of this work with an ancient computer. All right, let's close. And this is is this the opposite of flexing? What would you call this? This is just brutal honesty. It's I don't want to pretend that I have this amazing setup that I'm using to make my music. If you're like me and thought you needed this and this and this before you can even start making music, get over that, because the barriers are not as high as you think. So I'm just going to open up Logic Express here, and to more brutal honesty, I am not using Logic Pro. Everything that I've recorded on this has been in Logic Express, and it's Logic Express 9. It's yeah, it's old. It's old, but it works. So here is an example of the last piece that I finished on this computer. As you can see, it's got 26 tracks and then 6 buses. But also notice that none of these tracks are MIDI. And there's a very good reason for that. It's all part of the workflow that I have to do to make music on this machine. If I had all of these playing in MIDI tracks still, it wouldn't even load the project. There's just not enough memory available to load the sample libraries. So here is what I had to do workflow-wise. So before I even get into the first file here, let me just show you in the Finder here. And as you can see, there's several project files in here. So I start with a basic idea in my first file. And as I add instruments to it, I am watching the memory limit. Once I'm getting close to about where it is too much for Logic to handle, then I start bouncing the instruments out to audio tracks. I make a new file, import those as audio tracks, and get rid of the MIDI tracks. And then I make all new MIDI tracks for the additional instruments I'm adding. Rinse and repeat that cycle each time. Depending on the size of the instrument sample I'm loading, I might be able to get 2 to 4 instruments per project file before I have to bounce them down and then start a new project file. Is it a hassle? Yeah, it is a hassle, and it's time consuming to sit there and wait for tracks to bounce when you'd like to just add a new track and start playing. But it works. And there's some tricks you can implement in your system as you work through this that make it easier if you ever need to go back and change things, which I need to do sometimes. So here we are in Logic, and I've got a harp from BBC Symphony Orchestra. If I just open up that interface here, if you haven't tried BBC Symphony, I've got the Core, which is the mid-range package. If you want to try that out, Spitfire has a lower version called BBC Discovery, and it is either free if you fill out a little survey and send it to them. They'll send you a link to it for free, or otherwise you can pay $49 and not have to do the survey. But it's just wonderful. There's a lot of things in Core that I think are worth paying the money for, but if you just want to try something out and actually be able to produce something that sounds like a real orchestra, Discovery does that. So if the instrument sounds are one of your hurdles, try that. So I'll close this here. I've got Harp, which is in BBC. My pizzicato strings, actually those, I'm not even using that. That track should not be open. So here's another thing. Don't have extra tracks with memory expensive sample libraries open if you're not using them. That should definitely not be there. I'm going to delete that. Now, and the Arctic Swells, I forgot to mention, that is Spitfire Labs. So I really love Spitfire's interfaces. Now in the interface here, it tells you about how much memory that Labs is using right now. So just loading this Arctic Swells, it's using 206 megabytes of memory to hold the information, the data from this sample. And then if I go back to BBC, up here, it's telling me that BBC is using 413 megabytes. And this is a running total. So like if I open another BBC Symphony instrument and load something other than a harp, that memory total is going to go up. And so it's a running total of what BBC Symphony is currently using. Once I get above 1.5 gigs, it starts to get a little iffy in Logic. So I try to keep it under 1.5. At this point, I would solo out each individual instrument, and then I'd do a bounce. And so I'd bounce it into an audio file, which I would then import, save the project as a new project, and then import it into that one. Okay, and here we are. I've skipped ahead a few projects, but this is Fantasy Harp 5. I've now got my harp in an audio track. I've got my Arctic Swells bounced down to audio, The shakuhachi was already audio, so I haven't done anything with that. It's still 3 separate tracks. Got my viola and cello. In this particular project, I am adding violin 1 and violin 2. They're from the BBC Symphony Orchestra. And I've got 3 different tracks for articulations. Each of those different articulations, it doesn't load any additional memory. So having these 3 tracks is no more memory than having 1 track of violin 1. So like I said, I'm using 1.5 gigabytes of memory loading these 2 instruments. I'm at the limit, so at this point I would need to bounce my tracks. So I would solo all of the violins, all of the violin 1s, bounce the entire piece, and then likewise I would uncheck those, solo just the violin 2s, bounce that entire thing. I could also do a bounce in place. So the main reason I don't like to do the bounce in place, it has to do with the workflow and if I need to go back and do any changes. And let me pull up one of the following projects and I'll show you why. Okay, so here we have the 10th project in this workflow. By now we've got all of the strings entered in, we've got a flute and an oboe, and we're working on the rest of the woodwinds. Suppose now that I did something wrong with, let's say, the contrabass, and I want to go back and fix that note. I mean, if you've still got everything in MIDI, super easy, you just go back, click on the note, move it to wherever you need to move it to. If it's in audio, it's locked in. So in order to actually change that, as I've been bouncing these out, with each project that I've been numbering, every time I bounce an instrument out of one of the projects, I label it with the number of the project that it is coming from. So if I want to go fix the MIDI on the contrabass, I look at the audio file that I imported and I see this says contrabass 6. So I need to go back to Fantasy Harp 6 to find the MIDI track for the contrabass, and then I can fix the note, rebounce it, then I can come back here to Fantasy Harp 10, get rid of contrabass 6, and then import the audio file for contrabass 6A that I just bounced that has the fix in there. So it's a few extra steps, but it's really not that much of a burden. If you keep track of where these bounces are coming from, it's quite easy to go back, fix a mistake in the MIDI, and then re-export it. Okay, so I've got the mix project open again. So once I am done adding instruments, I usually like to make a new file called mix1, and in my mix1 project, I have no MIDI. It's all audio. So other than that, other than the ancient laptop that I'm using and the interesting tweaks that I have to do to my workflow, besides those things, my keyboard here, it's exactly what I wanted because it's simple, it's light. I don't have this set up all the time, so I wanted something super quick, super easy, super light that I could just move around. It does USB directly into the MacBook, so there's no need for an additional MIDI audio interface. So I hope my little show and tell session has been helpful. The main thing that I want is to let you know that whatever barriers you think are blocking you, the barriers are either not as big as you think or there are ways around them. You don't need the fanciest superpowered computer with loads of memory. If you have that, great. But if you have an old computer, you want to do this stuff, but you feel limited by the computer, there are still ways that you can record the stuff that you want and get some really professional sounding results. So I hope this has been helpful, and I bid you good night and happy music making.